Hi, I'm Flexi Cosplay, and today I've partnered with DecoArt to bring you this bright gold metallic armor technique. I've used a princess pauldron for my armor choice. I think it's a great shape, and it has a lot of details that are interesting, but you can use this technique on any piece of foam armor that you might have for your cosplay. So let's get started. Great, so let's get started with our princess pauldron. For this one, we're going to use the bright gold metallic armor technique. And in your kit, you're going to see some colors that they seem very basic, but there's a lot that we can do with them. You're looking at your 24 karat gold extreme flex metallic, your basic black extreme flex acrylic, and then your white extreme flex acrylic as well. Aside from this, we can make these three work with a variety of shades, but if you also have a lighter gold that's metallic, like they have a chalice gold that works really great, any of their honestly, any of their lighter gold metallics work great as well. We can use that for a highlight, but you can also just mix the white and the gold to make a highlight later on. So we'll explain that as we go. So you're going to start with your princess pauldron. This is the basic shape. I also like to make the overlays in 2mm foam because it gives you more depth, and that it gives us a lot to work with as we begin painting. It's rather than having to paint in the depth, we can work with the depth that's already there and use the paints to accent that. I also used hot glue, which I do a lot for the small details because it looks a little more organic. It looks like a melted metal almost whenever you do paint over it. So a mixture of the 2mm foam and the hot glue I found works really well. For this, make sure that you always shake your paints. You want to make sure they're completely mixed. We start with the black. You want to have a completely black base for your princess pauldron. Instead of putting it on a palette, honestly, right now I'm just going to put it straight onto the pauldron because we are not avoiding any part of this piece whenever we paint. I like to use the widest brushes that I have for this because, again, we're not avoiding anything and we're just trying to get a nice coverage. The cool part about these paints, which is one of my favorite parts, is that you don't have to prime your foam. This paint will work with EVA foam without being primed and will still allow for it to flex, which is why they're called extreme flex. And you can, if say you flex them and it kind of bent up your paint a bit, you can use a heat gun lightly over it, just the same as you would if you had primed it, and it will have the foam reshape again and smooth out any of those bumps or wrinkles that you might have caused in the paint. So it's super awesome, especially when you go to a con. I always take a heat gun with me because you're going to end up folding some of your armor bits during the transport, and then you can just heat gun it out whenever you get there. So as you can see already, the paint has an awesome coverage. We might be able to even get away with just one coat here for your base. That's how great it is. So I'm just trying to avoid painting my hands, avoid any big spots of paint that could drip. Don't forget to get your edges. And I will also do the bottom of this because it's a pauldron, so it sits on your shoulder like this. You could potentially see this part sticking out or even these parts. It's obviously not required that you do that, but it makes for a way nicer finish. It just is those little details, the extra time that you put into it, that turns a costume into something a little bit more extraordinary. Again, I'm just making sure that my paint isn't gathering around any of the details too much where it might drip. But one of the greatest properties of the Extreme Flex that I like is that it has a nice leveling finish. So even if you had maybe a little bit of unevenness as you're painting something, as it dries, it has a nice leveling property to it. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but you know, help it out as much as you can along the way just to be safe. That already looks pretty fantastic. I really think we might be able to get away with just one coat for the base, but we'll see how it goes. Okay, so before we paint the bottom, obviously we need to let this top dry. What I usually do is I just make sure I have all of the top as well as all of the edges painted completely. That way you know, like, you're not missing an edge, you're not having to like go back and try to do edges whenever you're starting to work on the opposite side. You know that all of your edges are already completed because you mentally made that note ahead of time. So all the top, all of the edges, and then just kind of rotate it in the light. Take a look at all of the sides of your details before you decide you're done. Make sure that you've painted all of the edging to any of the raised parts. Do that on both sides. This little piece down here. And those are easy to do, the ones that are closest to other details. But I promise it will be annoyingly visible later if you don't catch it now. So just take your time now. Make sure you have it all. It's looking great. Okay, so sit it down. I usually don't have to put my brushes in water or any sort of solvent at this point. We're going to use it. This doesn't take that long to dry. Your paintbrush won't dry up before then. You're just going to flip it over and paint the other side with the exact same color anyway. So let's give it, I would say, 10 to 15 minutes and then we will be back. Okay, so you finally let the top mostly dry at least. You can take a look, see if any of the pores from the foam have kind of left any spots that you might need to touch up, and I might have a few, but really I think it's going to be okay. Time to turn it over and get to painting the underside. You don't have to paint all the way up into the crevices you're not going to see. I just like to paint on the spots that you probably could see if they would be exposed. Basically all of these giant flat sides for the cauldron, for sure, could be exposed. It'll take away from the continuity of your cosplay. So just do that. And remember that you already painted the edges, so you don't have to worry about those. So I'll just paint up in there. Kind of lay it on thick, just to make sure you only have to do one coat. And then what I do is I go around and I check my edges, make sure that nothing needs maybe a second coat. It's all looking good. This coverage of this paint is pretty solid, so not much touching up I'll need to do, if any. While this is drying, I'll just go ahead and, for some of these, let's see here. You can see a little bit of the pores sticking out. It's kind of hard, even in a video, to notice that. If you're feeling pretty particular, you can go through and just kind of sponge into those spots if you need to. I find that the quality of the foam also will help with this. It's not up to the paint, it's up to the foam. My 2mm foam that I used was of a cheaper quality than the rest of this, which is why I'm finding that these top details have a little bit more issue with the pores. But yeah, no, that is one coat of paint and it is solidly black. Very satisfying. So we're gonna let the inside dry now as well. Okay, once your pauldron is completely dry, that black base must be completely dry. Can't emphasize that enough. Because we're gonna start painting over this, you don't wanna pull up the black paint onto the other layers. So you have your solid black base on your pauldron. We are going to use the DecoArt Extreme Flex Metallic Armor Technique Kit. Because we are doing the bright gold armor, I'll be using the 24K gold, the Extreme Flex Metallic. We already used the black in the acrylic. We also might add in some white for highlights and mix it with the gold. But if you also have a lighter gold in a metallic, any of the DecoArt line metallics, those work fantastically. There's a chalice gold, which I'll be using in addition to this for some of the highlights, but you can just mix some white with it as well if you only have the kit with you. Because it's perfect, it's just gonna be enough. For this gold, because we're doing a bright gold and not a brushed metal, I'm going to use a sponge so that I avoid all of the divots on the armor and only sponge the wider swaths of the armor as well as the raised portions. So let's take our 24K gold. Always shake and mix to make sure that your paint has not separated, which will happen just in transport or naturally over time when you have it sitting on your shelves. I usually like to put a bit at the corner of my palette so that I have a wider space here to sponge off some of the gold, because you don't want to have so much on your brush that it goes into the divots. So cover it completely, sponge onto your palette so that you have a nice coverage here. And I'm going to start with something simple. So these wider parts, they're going to be completely covered. There's no detail, raised details or lowered ones here. As you start making your way towards any of the details, so your trim, anything that's raised, go light. You don't want to push the paint all the way into the detail. And you can see how that's kind of working there, where it doesn't go all the way into the lowest parts, it only paints and sponges on the raised portions. Start on your widest parts where you know it's going to have coverage, and then sponge lightly over any of the places that have raised details. Always sponge your paint off. It's easy to forget, but you're only going to be able to do this once. If you paint into the details, say you get kind of paint all the way in where it's supposed to be black in the lower parts, you're going to have to repaint it black and then sponge paint over again. So you really only mess up once before you get the hang of that. As you paint, you'll be able to see that your details will start to pop. This is what you want. The reason that I start with painting on a flat surface that I know is going to have coverage is because if you accidentally have too much paint on your brush, you're going to get it off right there at the flat parts. You'll have a less of a chance of messing it up at the details. Whenever you have a higher raised detail, so this is 2mm foam work that I laid on top of here, it's a bit thicker than the hot glue details. You can have a little bit more pressure because you've got to get into the lower parts with your brush. Okay, so I'm going to let this dry a little bit before I finish up the edges, and then I'll probably do one more passing on just the highest points and the middles of the largest points to kind of give a more solid color. But it really has nice coverage as it is. You could technically really stop at this point and would have that gold color. And by stop at this point, I mean just for the base gold coat. We still have highlights to do, but I'm also going to do just one smaller base coat as well for this before I start moving on to the highlights, and I'll finish up the edges too after it dries. So we'll give it another like 10 or 15 minutes now. Okay, so you've let this dry. Let's go ahead and do another coat. Oh, go. Stick to the main areas. That's kind of a weird way to word this, but the biggest parts that are exposed. We're making it a richer, more vibrant gold in those sections. And do your edges that we couldn't do before. Perfect. So that's your nice deep gold, 24 karat gold base. At this point, you can let it dry the whole way before you get to the next step, or you can begin the next step because you're kind of blending things anyway. I would like to use a chalice gold for my lighter color, but you could also just maybe mix a white with your gold too for highlights, doesn't matter. So again, you're offloading most of your paint before you even start. The way that you do highlights is that you're emphasizing the areas that are normally highlighted by natural lighting. If you're not sure what that means, you can always hold it up to a light and see which parts reflect the most. So if you have, say, a light coming in, your pauldron is naturally sitting like this on your shoulder, right? With this being the top. the light will hit this part first at the top, this tip here. The middles will have the most highlight, and the tops. So the light will come down. You want to do all the tops coming down and down that direction. So I'm just taking a lighter gold or a gold mixed with a white and emphasizing that a little bit more. I'm going to start here at the top. Another thing to do whenever you're highlighting is if you're doing edges like these edges, start at the top edge and pull lightly towards the direction that the light would fall. Very lightly graze over the parts that are sticking out. And we're doing the middle of the exposed parts because those would be naturally highlighted. Lightly blend it outwards into the darker areas. So you're almost faking brightness with the paints. You see how I stay here at the most exposed part and then blend outwards? Same with here at the edges. You're going to have light hitting the edges and then blend towards the middle. The light naturally would hit the top of this first, so you can start up here at the top in the middle. And then blend downwards. And then pull on all the detail pieces from the top edges. Take a once over, make sure that you got all the spots that have light, and you'll notice it more as you add highlights and then turn it in the light. You'll notice, oh, the light hit this spot, I didn't realize it before. And you can always just go back and add more then. That looks pretty great. So the last part here is you've gotten all the highlights, looks awesome, everything's great. But if you want to have just an extra little pop, anything where you accidentally got maybe gold paint around the side here where it should be black, just use a detail brush, paint it black. But this part takes some time, but it can help make the rest of the colors pop a lot better. So when you think you're done, just take a step back and look. Looks great. Emphasizing those deep black lines in the details just helps to bring forward the raised parts that are highlighted as well. So it's just giving more emphasis to the things that would naturally occur. And really that's kind of what cosplay is about. It's the same thing you would do with makeup on your face. It's to emphasize different features. And that's what paints do for foam and for cosplay. So love the metallic look in the light. And even close up, it looks wonderful because of the paints and the highlights that you used and the lowlights. It's a wonderful gold Princess Pauldron, all made possible with the Extreme Flex metallic paints from DecoArt.